The courthouse was cold. The kind of cold that made you wonder if the walls had ever known warmth. Outside, rain streaked the windows in long, tired lines. Inside, a woman in a simple cream dress stood clutching a bouquet of silk roses, her hands trembling as if she were about to be sentenced rather than married. Her name, at least the one she now used, was Clara Dawson. She was 28, with quiet eyes and a stillness about her that made people assume she was shy. But Clara was not shy. She was hiding. Across from her stood the man she was about to marry. Michael Reed. Tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked more borrowed than bought. His face was unreadable, like pages someone had once written on and then erased. But his eyes were dark, steady, and strange. Not cruel. Not kind. Just quietly watching. They had met 2 weeks earlier through an arrangement brokered by someone both of them trusted, a woman named Lottie, who ran a shelter in the southern part of the state. Lottie had introduced them over coffee. Clara needed a way out. Michael needed someone to help him keep his newly inherited farm. Neither asked too many questions. It was the kind of deal made by people too tired for romance, too cautious for honesty. Just two souls offering each other something they both lacked, a new beginning. And so, here they were. The judge recited the vows. Clara repeated them. Michael did too. Neither hesitated. There were no guests. No photographs. Just two signatures, a quiet exchange of rings, and the soft creak of the courthouse door as they stepped back into the rain. The car ride to the farm was mostly silent. Michael drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the window. Clara sat beside him, her suitcase between her knees, her heart tight in her chest. "Is there anyone I should know about?" he asked softly. "Anyone who might come looking?" Clara shook her head. No, not anymore. She didn't lie. But she didn't tell the truth either. Michael didn't press. The farm was small, nestled in the shadow of pine-covered hills. The house was old but clean. Faded curtains, a narrow porch, and the smell of firewood lingering in the air. There was a barn that looked like it had stories to tell, and a garden choked with weeds, as if waiting for someone to care again. Michael carried her suitcase inside. "Your room is upstairs. I took the one down the hall." Clara paused. "Separate rooms?" He nodded. "We may be married, but I figured you'd want space. We're strangers, after all." She stared at him for a moment. Something about the way he said, "strangers," made her chest ache. Like it mattered to him more than he wanted to admit. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, Clara stood by the window of her new room, watching the wind stir the tall grass. She should have felt relief. She had escaped. She had left behind the past, her real name, the man who had ruined everything, and the secrets that once clung to her like smoke. But the moment she had looked into Michael's eyes at the courthouse, something in her had faltered. There was something about those eyes. Something she should have recognized. But from where? And why now? Days melted into each other like candle wax. Clara found rhythm in routine. She rose early, fed the chickens, swept the porch, and learned the quiet pulse of farm life. Michael worked long hours repairing fences, fixing old wiring, and restoring life to the barn. He never asked questions, never hovered, but always noticed. When Clara burned the bread one morning, he wordlessly set out a new loaf the next day. When she wept silently one night in the dark, he left a small lantern outside her door. They did not speak often, but something delicate was growing, like a fragile seed pressing up through hard soil. One afternoon, Clara wandered beyond the fence line, into the wild field behind the barn. The grass reached her waist, and the sun warmed her face like a kindness she had forgotten. As she stood there, eyes closed, a sound cut through the breeze. A whistle. Low. Familiar. 3 short notes. Her heart stilled. She knew that whistle. It had lived in her nightmares. She spun around, but the field was empty. No footsteps. No voice. Nothing but the wind. Clara walked back to the house quickly, her fingers clenched around her skirt. That night, she could barely eat. Her mind raced with questions she had buried for too long. What if someone had found her? What if he was watching? What if she had never truly escaped? Michael noticed her silence. "You all right?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. She nodded, avoiding his eyes. "Just tired." But that night, she did not sleep. She sat in her room, holding the locket she always kept hidden in her suitcase. Inside it was a photo, aged and slightly worn, of her younger brother, Thomas. He had vanished when she was 16. She was the last one to see him. And the last one to hear that whistle. 3 notes. It was their signal. A secret language between siblings when they were kids running from their drunken stepfather. If she heard it, she was supposed to run toward it. But now, after 12 years, she pressed the locket to her chest, heart thudding. Could Thomas be alive? Or was someone toying with her? The next day, she searched the field. No footprints. No clues. Just wind and grass and silence. She tried to push it from her mind. Instead, she focused on the garden. She pulled weeds until her fingers were raw. She repaired the chicken coop. She baked again. She wrote letters to Lottie she never sent. And still, Michael remained quietly present. One evening, as they shared tea on the porch, Clara found herself watching him. The curve of his brow. The shape of his mouth. The line of his jaw. None of it seemed familiar. But his eyes. Those eyes. She had seen them once before. Not in fear. Not in memory. But in love. She swallowed hard. "Did you ever live in Newford?" she asked suddenly. Michael's hand paused mid-sip. "No," he said after a beat. "Why?" She forced a smile. "Just curious." But her heart screamed at her. Because the more she looked at him, the more she realized, those were Thomas's eyes. Older. Changed. Guarded. But the same eyes that once winked at her across crowded rooms and whispered jokes during storms. And if Michael was Thomas, why did he not say anything? Clara could not sleep. The question looped in her head like a song stuck on repeat. Is he Thomas? Is he lying? Or am I losing my mind? She watched Michael more carefully after that night. The way he held his fork. How he rubbed his knuckles when thinking. The way his right eyebrow twitched slightly when he disagreed with something but chose not to argue. All of it felt familiar. Intimate. As if her body remembered him before her mind did. One afternoon, while he was out mending a gate, Clara crept downstairs and opened the drawer in the writing desk he often used. It was the first time she had ever broken his trust. She found a stack of letters. Most were bills, but one had no return address, just a date written in the top corner. 6 months ago. She unfolded it slowly. Inside, in blocky, careful handwriting, were the words, "You told me she was gone. But I saw her. She's alive. You lied. You owe me the truth." Her fingers trembled. She read it again. There was no name. No signature. But it confirmed everything she feared. Michael was hiding something. And someone else knew she was alive. Her throat tightened. She returned the letter quickly and backed away from the desk. That evening, they sat across from each other in the kitchen. The silence stretched. Clara's spoon clinked against the bowl like a slow drumbeat. Michael's eyes occasionally flicked to her, but he said nothing. Finally, she set her spoon down. "Why did you agree to marry me?" she asked. He looked up. "Lottie said you needed help. I trusted her." "That's it." He hesitated, then nodded. "That's it." But something in his voice cracked, just a little. Clara stood and walked to the sink, her hands gripping the edge. "You've never lived in Newford?" He answered too quickly. "No. Not even as a boy." He paused. "No." Her hands clenched. "You're lying," she whispered. Michael stood. "Clara." "My name's not Clara," she snapped, spinning around. And I think you already know that. The silence that followed was heavy. Michael's face paled. She took a step forward. Who are you? Really? His mouth opened, closed. Then finally, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, he said, "You should sit down." She didn't. Michael sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I knew the moment I saw you at the shelter. I didn't say anything because I thought you didn't remember me. And part of me didn't want to break whatever this was." Clara blinked. He continued, "Your name is Emily. Emily Hart. And I was, your brother's best friend. I lived 3 doors down from you growing up. I was there the night he disappeared." Her knees buckled slightly. "I remember you," he said. "But you vanished after that. I searched for years." Clara's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me when we met?" "Because I thought maybe, for once, I could just protect you without bringing back the ghosts." She stepped backward. "So you do know what happened to Thomas?" Michael's eyes darkened. "No. I only know that he's not dead. Because he sent me that letter." He reached into his pocket and held it up. Another note. Newer. Faded by water. "Tell her I'm sorry. I never meant to leave her." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. The whistle. The eyes. The silence. It was all connected. And now, the past was no longer chasing her. It had arrived. The house felt different now. Heavier. As if the truth had changed the shape of its walls. Clara sat in the barn the next morning, watching sunlight pour through the cracks in the wooden beams. Dust swirled in the light, quiet and restless, like her. Michael had not tried to speak to her since the night before. He had given her space, as always, but now the silence between them was no longer soft. It pulsed with everything left unsaid. He had known her name. He had known who she was. And still, he had pretended to be a stranger. That betrayal stung deeper than she could admit. But worse than that was the letter. Thomas had written again. After all these years. She stared at the note until the words blurred. "Tell her I'm sorry. I never meant to leave her." That sentence echoed louder than any memory. Clara had spent 12 years thinking her brother was dead. He had disappeared the night their stepfather came home drunk and angry. She remembered the screaming. The sound of breaking glass. Thomas pushing her out the back door and yelling for her to run. She did. She never saw him again. Later, when the house burned down, some said it was an accident, others whispered it was revenge. His body was never found. And Clara was shuffled through foster homes, given a new name, and taught to forget. But she never truly had. She returned to the house. Michael was there, sitting on the porch steps, as if waiting for her to make the next move. "I want the truth," she said. Michael stood. "Then I'll give it to you." They went inside. He pulled a small wooden box from the closet, one Clara hadn't seen before, and opened it. Inside were old photographs, newspaper clippings, and one charred scrap of a blue flannel shirt. "I've been looking for him since that night," Michael said. "The fire didn't kill him. I know that. I saw someone drag him away before the flames got too high. I followed the leads, but they always went cold. Until last year." He handed her a faded photo. A man, older, unshaven, wearing a military coat, standing outside a diner in Arizona. Clara squinted. The eyes were the same. It was him. "He goes by Tommy Hill now," Michael said. "He's been moving from town to town. Never staying long." "Why?" Clara whispered. "I think he believes he's protecting you. That if he stayed gone, you'd be safe." Clara pressed her hand over her heart. "That doesn't make it right." "No," Michael agreed. "But it makes it human." Tears welled in her eyes. "I spent so long running from a past I didn't understand," she said. "And now that I do, I don't know what to do with it." Michael stepped closer. Then let me help you. She looked up at him, searching his face, not just for answers, but for honesty. His lies had protected her, but they had also hurt her. Why did you marry me? She asked again. His eyes didn't flinch. Because I loved you before I ever had the right to say it. Clara's breath caught. You remembered me all these years? He nodded. Always. And suddenly, she wasn't sure whether to run or fall into his arms. But she knew one thing, this story wasn't over. Thomas was alive. And she was going to find him. Clara stood at the edge of the gravel driveway, her suitcase in hand. The morning sun had barely risen, and the farm still slept beneath a golden haze. Michael tightened the strap of his worn leather satchel and walked toward her, the truck idling softly behind them. You do not have to come, she said, not looking at him. I know, he replied. But I am not letting you face him alone. They drove for hours. Through hills and quiet towns, past motels and silos, each mile pulling Clara closer to the truth she had feared for more than a decade. Michael kept his eyes on the road, his silence steady. He had never been the type to fill the air with words, and now, she was grateful. She needed the silence. She needed space to breathe, to prepare. They stopped in a small Arizona town just as the sun dipped behind the ridges. The diner Michael had found from the photo was still there, barely. A flickering neon sign, a crooked bench, and dust that seemed permanent. Clara stepped out of the truck, her legs weak. Across the street, the door to the diner opened, and an older man stepped out. He had a limp. A cap pulled low over graying hair. A box of napkins tucked under one arm. But even from a distance, she knew. It was him. Thomas. Her brother. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the lot, and stopped when he saw her. They stared at each other across the road. Time seemed to peel away. She saw the boy who once taught her to climb trees, who shielded her from monsters and thunderstorms, and the man who broke everything. She stepped forward. He did not move. And then she was standing in front of him, close enough to see the scar above his eyebrow. The one he got protecting her. The one she never forgot. You're real, she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought you were dead, he said, just as broken. I was, she replied. But I came back. He looked at her as if trying to match her face to the girl in his memories. I never meant to leave you, Emmy. She hadn't heard that name in years. Not since before the fire. Clara, no, Emily, took a shaky breath. Then why did you? Thomas looked down. After that night, after what he did, I thought I killed him. I dragged myself out and ran. I was afraid. I didn't know if you were safe. I thought they'd come after you if they knew I lived. You left me, she said softly, not accusing, just stating the wound that never healed. I did, he whispered. And I've regretted it every day since. Tears slid down her cheeks. Michael stood quietly at a distance, not interrupting, just watching with guarded care. Emily reached out and took Thomas's hand. We can't change the past, she said. But we can stop running. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. They sat in the diner for hours, exchanging fragments of broken years. The gaps were wide, but they bridged them together, memory by memory. And when they returned to the truck, Emily looked at Michael with something new in her eyes. Not fear. Not confusion. But trust. You said you loved me, she said, stepping closer. I did, he replied. I still do. She touched his face gently. Then come home with me. All of you. And as they drove back through the desert, with her brother asleep in the back seat and the night sky unraveling above them, Emily Dawson, no longer Clara, no longer lost, knew she was finally heading somewhere real home. The farmhouse looked different when they returned. It was not the structure that had changed, it was Emily. Every wall, every quiet hallway, every creaking floorboard felt less like a hiding place and more like her own. She stepped inside, no longer carrying the weight of someone else's name. Thomas walked behind her slowly, pausing in the doorway like he was afraid to step inside a life that did not belong to him. His hands were calloused, his eyes cautious, but she saw something soft in his shoulders, as if decades of guilt had finally begun to fall away. Michael met them at the table, fresh tea already waiting. They sat together, not as strangers, not as people defined by their pain, but as a small, fragile family. The following weeks passed in quiet restoration. Emily worked in the garden again, this time with purpose. Michael built a second bench for the porch, and Thomas spent hours sanding the old barn door until it opened without a groan. There was laughter in the house now, light and uncertain, like a song being remembered after a long silence. But healing, she learned, was not a straight line. There were days when the past returned like a storm. When Thomas would wake in a sweat, or Emily would flinch at the sound of boots on the wooden floor. There were hard conversations, deep sobs, apologies that came in broken pieces. But they faced them together. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in gold, Emily sat beside Michael on the porch. The sky stretched wide and quiet. She leaned into his shoulder, the silence between them no longer filled with things unsaid. "You saved me," she murmured. "I lied to you," he replied gently. "Yes. But you also found me." Michael turned his head. "I would have told you, eventually." "I know," she whispered. "But I'm glad I remembered first. Because now I see you, fully." He reached for her hand, brushing his thumb along her knuckles. "Do you still want to be married to a stranger?" She smiled softly. "You're not a stranger anymore." Michael kissed her forehead, no urgency, no pressure. Just the kind of kiss that said, "We made it." A few weeks later, they held a small ceremony beneath the trees behind the barn. No courthouse. No arrangements. Just them, Thomas and Lottie, who had driven all night to be there, her cheeks wet with pride. Emily wore a simple white dress, her hair down, no veil. Michael wore the same suit he had the first time, but this time, it fit better. Not in size, but in truth. There were no vows read from paper. Just words spoken from the soul. And when they kissed, it wasn't a beginning. It was a promise, sealed not in forgetfulness, but in forgiveness. That night, as stars spilled across the sky, Thomas sat beside the fire, quietly strumming a guitar he had not touched in years. His sister laughed nearby, her head on her husband's shoulder. The past had not vanished, it had simply been given a place to rest. Emily no longer feared her memories. She no longer ran from the truth. She had lost herself once, but through the eyes of a stranger, she found not only the truth, but love, family, and home. Sometimes, the road to healing is not about forgetting the past, it is about reclaiming it. The people who carry our deepest wounds may also be the ones who help us heal, and love born in truth, even if late, has the power to turn every broken beginning into a beautiful ending. Did this story move you? Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been saved by someone who first felt like a stranger? Share this story with someone who believes it is too late to begin again. Subscribe now for more emotional stories that remind us love can still bloom, no matter the past.